Running a business online? Look legit and own your own brand with professional tools from GoDaddy. Instantly build trust with your customers and boost your credibility with an email that matches your domain, so people know you mean business. There's never been a better time. Just go to GoDaddy.com/GD now and choose from a wide variety of popular domains to find one that's right for you. Pair that with a professional email that works for all your business needs, from daily communications to email marketing and everything in between. That's a little price for a lot of credibility. For a limited time, get a domain and matching professional email for just 99 cents a month for 1 year. Go to GoDaddy.com/GD now and look legit with GoDaddy. That's GoDaddy.com/GD now. Again, GoDaddy.com/GD now. There's never been a better time to choose the domain and email that's right for you. New customer purchases only. Products auto-renew separately. See terms on site. GoDaddy.com/GD now.
Hey everybody, it's Nicole Byer here with some hot takes from Wayfair. A cozy corduroy sectional from Wayfair? Yeah, that's a hot take. Go on and add it to your cart and take it. A pink glam nightstand from Wayfair? Scalding hot take. Take it before I do. A mid-century modern cabinet from Wayfair that doubles as a wine bar? Do I have to say it? It's a hot take. Get it at Wayfair.com and enjoy that free shipping too.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Hello and welcome to mini episode number 466 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have two spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from the 25th of April 2025, and story number 1 comes from Rinks. I've debated on and off about sending you an email about my stories, but have simply continued to push it off to a later time, until certain things happened that made me think, maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. I have quite a few stories, but I'll share a few and later on share some events that led me to finally writing to you. I am Filipina, born and raised. The Philippines is a country beautifully rich in folklore and spiritualism. So much so that even though Catholics are often taught to not believe in other things, somehow Filipinos have found a way to blend folk beliefs, Catholicism and spiritualism from other countries, and nobody bats an eyelid. But I digress. Let me start with a few stories about my parents. My dad apparently has what's called anting, or a protective charm that he had gotten from a witch that lived in Mount Arayat, a volcano famous for its beauty, folklore and legends. I could never confirm this, but aside from that, he's told me that he's seen ghosts before. My mom, on the other hand, has strange abilities. She told me a few times when I was younger that she often attracted good fortune to businesses. Where she went, a once empty stall would find itself suddenly alive with customers. So much so that in her youth, the local sellers at the open market would tell her to sit next to them, giving her free produce, just so that she would sit there and attract people to their stall. After she told me this, I was sceptical, of course. But I would observe places and shops we'd go to, even well into my 20s. And sure enough, there would be more people in the store or restaurant by the time that we left. Maybe it's just coincidence. But that hasn't really changed, even when we moved to the US. She also has this thing that when her palm itches for no apparent reason, so no mosquito bites or anything, that means she's likely to win at the casino. In times when we'd go, which is not often, she would always come back home with more money than she put in. It might be just $10 or $20 or way more, but it was always a net positive. I'm not sure if this is something she's always had when we lived in the Philippines, since I don't remember her ever going to a casino there. But I think back then she said that it was a sign that she was about to receive money. This may be just general folklore, because I think my aunts also had this belief. Mostly jokingly, but I'm not really sure. But it seemed to often come true for my mom. As for me, I'm a skeptical believer. I don't attribute every little thing to spirits, but I believe they exist. I've seen them with my own eyes, after all. Growing up, I would often find shadows flitting at the edge of my vision or see shadows when there shouldn't be any. I never thought much of it, and often would just think that I was seeing things. But I never wanted to be left alone in the dark at night by myself. While still living in the Philippines, during my grandfather's wake, my dad's dad, I stayed at my cousin's place, where she and many of the household help believed that there were earth spirits that lived in their yard called Nuno. In any case, I wasn't used to sleeping at their place, so I was feeling a little nervous, and me and my cousins were up quite late. My female cousin started to get peckish, so we both decided to get some bowls so we could eat some snacks. On our way out, the door of the room we were in faced another door directly opposite, which was open. The gap was just big enough to have both of us standing in the space with perhaps a bit of a gap. Enough for one adult to stand there comfortably, but two would be crowded, I think. In any case, she pointed out that nobody was sleeping in that room and that it was empty. The lights were off and only the dim light from the outside provided a little bit of illumination, but not enough that you could see in fully. We headed into the kitchen, and I was even more nervous than before. We got our snacks and then headed back to the room. As she was opening the door, I got the strongest urge to look behind me, and silly me decided that I would do just that. When I turned to look, clear behind me was a figure, human-shaped with a bald head. I could really only tell by the outline the shape left against the dim light that was filtering in the room. I got frightened, and in my surprise turned into my cousin and pushed her forward. She exclaimed, "Hey, stop making a racket, you'll wake up the Nuno." This, of course, just scared me even more. It felt like forever when we finally got into the room to where I started to cry out of fear. This woke up my male cousin who had been sleeping in the room, and I told them both what happened. My female cousin thought it was our grandfather, and I recalled starting to see his face in the reflection of the glass shelf door across from the bed. Just his head. But this part is a bit fuzzy in my memory, so I don't know if this was something I made up or not. I did eventually fall asleep. And when I told the adults in the morning, they also told me that it was likely my grandfather checking in on us. Maybe he wasn't pleased that we were sneaking a midnight snack in, because I definitely didn't feel calm or unafraid at seeing the silhouette. When I was a little older in high school, I had a teacher approach me one recess telling me that she could sense in me a strong spiritual energy and that she could train me if I wanted to. I was unsure, so simply told her that, and she replied saying that the invitation was open for it if I changed my mind. She was someone who had experienced and, I believe, practiced having out-of-body experiences and was highly spiritual. She would tell the class that she could read things about people based on their penmanship, and some of my classmates would ask her to read them based on their writing. She would oblige sometimes, and my classmates were always slightly spooked and amazed by how accurate she could get. That said, whenever I asked her to look at my handwriting, she would always refuse to tell me what she saw. During high school, another event happened to me at home. I was working on my homework at about 8 or 9 p.m. I was quite focused, and even though the fan was off and the windows were shut, I wasn't feeling particularly warm. While I was writing something, I suddenly felt the hairs on my right arm rise up, like in goosebumps. Confused as to what was going on, I turned to look at my arm. Like a crowd in a stadium, I watched the hair on my arm move in a wave from my wrist to my elbow and back to my wrist again. It was also just a section of it too, a size big enough for a hand, I thought, as though some invisible hand was caressing my arm. It wasn't a partially down situation either. The hair in the goosebumped area was straight up, and the hairs outside of it were completely flat. I stared at my arm and watched my arm hairs do the wave before I got up and took all of my work to my parents' room next door. They were confused as to why I had just barged in, but they didn't ask any questions, and I simply said that I wanted to work in their room. I really don't know how I managed to go back and sleep in my room that night. Another story I have is about a recurring dream. I had this dream about falling, then waking up with a start in the middle of my bed. These dreams always annoyed me because I was always in the middle of a big bed, as it was a bed that I used to share with my older sister before she moved away for university. I would have this dream maybe once or twice every few months or so I eventually just didn't think much about it. When we finally moved to the US, I lived with my cousin, and since we didn't have a place of our own yet, me, my mom and my younger sister shared a bedroom with my cousin. He had a bunk bed that had a twin-sized bed up top and a queen-sized bed at the bottom. My cousin slept on the floor on a futon. One night I had that dream again, but this time I actually fell off the bed, the top bunk. This wasn't my first time sleeping on this bed. I'd been sleeping on this bed for a month or so now and never fell. I woke up not because of the dream, but because I felt my ankle hit the metal frame on the way down. When I landed on the floor, I simply groggily climbed back up and went straight back to sleep. The next day my cousin told me that he suddenly woke up for no reason in the middle of the night, just in time to see me falling off my bed. He said he got scared because I looked like a corpse, but then got up to climb back up. Since that time, I have never had that dream again. On to the present day, and to the reason that I finally wrote to you. I am now living in Japan, and working to try and earn a little money with my freelance illustration gig. It is late January 2025. I was having a bit of a mental crisis as an artist. I was doing the usual, why am I even doing this, line of questioning due to some events that happened before this point. I was cleaning my house. The day before, I was finally feeling better about being an artist, but was still generally in a low mood. I was listening to the podcast while I was cleaning, as I often would during work or chores. I'm not even fully listening at times, but I figure it's okay if I re-listen to some episodes. In any case, I had just finished vacuuming and had fully tuned back into listening to the podcast. It was Festive Fear Day 2 about Loretta's story, and it was just finishing with Loretta being thankful to you and Dan about taking a chance at her art. After which you gave some words of encouragement to artists. I nearly cried. It felt like you were talking to me and helping me out of my low mood. The weirder part of this is when I listen to the podcast. Sometimes when I'm done with the task I was doing, I would just pause the podcast in the middle and stop listening altogether. So everything lining up so perfectly like this was quite something, and I thought it was such a lovely coincidence. And then the next thing happened. About 2 or 3 days after that, I was on my way to Tokyo to see a friend who was struggling as a first-time mom. I was on my way to spend a few days and give support and help around the house, as they were also preparing for a move. I was on the night bus and I had just woken up from a nap and decided to tune into the podcast again, continuing from where I left off. As I listened, I eventually reached Festive Fear story number 7, which included the story about a midwife who eventually had her own child. I chuckled because she talked about daring people to tell the mother of a newborn to just sleep. And I thought about my friend, and then I thought about just how timely it was to hear this story. This was when I thought, maybe the universe is trying to tell me something. And I finally thought to write you an email. Even then I didn't write to you right away, but today, April the 25th, I was doing some grocery shopping and was listening to the podcast as usual. I was halfway through an episode and then number 419 mini episode Synchronicities started to play. Julie's story started. Another person who was prompted to write to you due to listening to a different episode of the podcast. And then a non-story which was full of synchronicities as well. This finally got me to write to you. It may be 3:51 a.m. as I'm finishing this, but I figured that the universe was really trying to tell me something and that I should go and write. So here I am. I love hearing about other cultures and their attitudes towards folklore and spiritualism, and I love this idea that in the Philippines, kind of Catholicism, spiritualism, folklore, old folk remedies, etc. all blend in together. Even the little detail of your dad getting this protective charm and then your mom attracting good fortune to businesses. Love that. And that businesses were like, well, get her to come and sit with me for the day. I'll give you free shit, and you attract people in. I love that. And I have heard that folklore before about when you get an itchy palm, it means that money is coming your way. And it sounds like you obviously inherited some sort of spiritual sensitivity from your parents. You know, seeing these shadows and figures at the edge of your vision and seeing this bald human-shaped figure in a dark room. I know that your cousins and the older people in your life thought it was your grandfather being a bit annoyed at you for having a snack. And I've said it once, I've said it 100 times, and I'm going to say it again. Loved ones need to stop being so freaky when they come back from the afterlife to give us some sort of message. I also think it's really fascinating about your teacher saying, you know, coming up to you and saying, hey, you've got a really strong spiritual energy. I can give you, you know, help in how to train that, and that your teacher read handwriting, etc., etc. Really, really interesting. I feel like if I, you know, as somebody who was previously a teacher, I feel like if I had done that, if I'd been like, hey, I've got like a gift and I can read handwriting, etc., I definitely would have at least gotten a disciplinary. And to be clear, that's not me slagging off that teacher, right? It's just different cultures. And I mean, when I was teaching, we were sort of implored not to talk about anything relating to our personal lives with students. I also don't know if I've ever heard a story quite like the kind of goosebump waves on your arm, like as though an invisible hand was caressing it. I sort of got the impression of a hand being just over the hairs on your arms and attracting the hairs and making them stand up, if you know what I mean, that it wasn't actually touching, it was sort of hovering over you. And to kind of see that physical manipulation happen in real life must have been a really powerful thing, to physically see the hairs on your arms in waves as this hand moves up and down your arm. No wonder you legged it into your parents' room. I'd be legging it into my parents' room screaming my head off. And I did an episode this week on Patreon that sort of was heavily about synchronicities in life, you know, about people who have had interesting experiences that have felt like the universe was trying to tell them something, or things were happening that sort of weren't just coincidences. And it happens regularly on the podcast itself. And I kind of always mention it when it does. Like, as you guys know, I will generally read the stories that come in chronological order. Sometimes I make mistakes and skip forward or miss a story or whatever, but generally they're read in chronological order. And I always think it's such a lovely thing when stories that have similar topics come together, and it happens really, really regularly. And I know it's going to happen when you've got pretty limited stories or, you know, topics of stories within the paranormal world, right? So I kind of get it, but I love that other people see the topics of particular episodes and they go, that is directly relevant to my life right now, and that is just what I needed. That is the type of synchronicity that we can absolutely get on board with.
Running a business online? Look legit and own your own brand with professional tools from GoDaddy. Instantly build trust with your customers and boost your credibility with an email that matches your domain, so people know you mean business. There's never been a better time. Just go to GoDaddy.com/GD now and choose from a wide variety of popular domains to find one that's right for you. Pair that with a professional email that works for all your business needs, from daily communications to email marketing and everything in between. That's a little price for a lot of credibility. For a limited time, get a domain and matching professional email for just 99 cents a month for 1 year. Go to GoDaddy.com/GD now and look legit with GoDaddy. That's GoDaddy.com/GD now. Again, GoDaddy.com/GD now. There's never been a better time to choose the domain and email that's right for you. New customer purchases only. Products auto-renew separately. See terms on site. GoDaddy.com/GD now.
And our second story today comes from Jessie. I've been sitting on this story for a long time. When I recount these events to others, let's say it leaves an impression. Good. Picture it, summer 2010, the New Mexico sun bakes the earth. The inhabitants of Albuquerque drag themselves around the land. Sun-kissed and drenched in sweat, most of us barely exist, bouncing between work and home or wherever air conditioning is available. The Sandia Mountains to the east taunt and tease reprieve in their higher elevations for those patient enough to drive an hour and a half to its peak, while the volcanoes on the West Mesa remind us that if the sun isn't hot enough, there is always the threat of hellfire resting below that could reignite at any moment. Not really, but this isn't a geological story podcast. I'll spare you. I had just completed my sophomore year at the University of New Mexico. I was shy and socially anxious. I was depressed and in a perpetual state of grieving. My maternal grandmother's passing a few years earlier was a destabilising event. Having lived with her all my life, her absence left a void in my heart that can never be healed. I had already fallen out of my prescribed Catholic faith years earlier. My grandmother's passing and the grief that followed prompted me to go on a bit of a spiritual quest. I explored myriad Eastern philosophies and spiritual pursuits. I collected sacred text from every religious tradition I could find, seeking answers, hoping for guidance. I collected spiritual effigies, erected a shrine to house them, adorned my space with Tibetan prayer flags, and took up meditation. Not only was I spiritually unbalanced, but I was also physically uprooted. My parents were eager to get me out of my grandmother's home, as I was essentially living all by myself in a 4-bedroom, fully furnished house. My maternal uncle, who also lived with my grandma and I, was off courting a woman who would eventually become his wife, so he was never home. I was all alone for months. My mom, seeing how this isolation was affecting me, had her garage renovated into a bedroom for me. Her house was already packed. It was a 3-bedroomed home that was currently occupied by both my parents, my brother, my sister, my paternal grandparents, and my paternal uncle. 8 humans with only 2 bathrooms. It was cramped, it was loud, but it was home. My garage room wasn't insulated, but it was cosy enough once a wall-mounted air conditioner was installed. My altar and prayer flags gave the room a splash of colour and a modicum, or at least the illusion, of peace. My mom, let's call her Jessica, because that's her name, is spiritually in tune. She has a penchant for being a bit clairvoyant and has rescued me from spiritually toxic atmospheres on a number of occasions. Being that so many people were crammed into her home, the energy of the house was a bit chaotic. My paternal grandparents were kind, but frequently negative. My paternal uncle is an alcoholic and loves getting under my father's skin. My sister was... saying she was a rebellious teen is the understatement of the century. And my little brother was in the early days of puberty, so he was gross and hormonal. I certainly didn't help the atmosphere with my brooding, woe is me attitude. While feeling particularly morose one day, I was rummaging through the refrigerator hoping to find something to distract me from my self-induced melancholy. As I closed the refrigerator door, a large, bald, Caucasian man standing well over 6 foot tall stood in the pathway between the kitchen and the den. I come from a Hispanic family. My mom and I are the only light-skinned people in our home. Who was this? How did he get into the house? He turned such that his profile was visible to me and then slowly disappeared. Standard reactions to this be damned. I went about my snacking, promised myself to tell my mom about it when she came home. Upon this revelation, my mom simply said, "Oh, you've seen him too. He's the previous owner. He died while on vacation. I don't get a bad feeling from him though. He's just attached to the house." Neat, Jessica, neat. When was she going to tell me that the house was haunted? My mom, ever the kind-hearted soul that she is, thought it would be beneficial to help the previous owner cross over into the next world. When everyone was out of the house, she lit candles, said prayers, and did something with salt and an egg to lead the spirit to the fireplace. The exact details are unclear to me. All I know is that when I came home from work, she said that she had helped the previous owner pass on and that we shouldn't be seeing him anymore. That was true, but what came in his wake was far more sinister. Pay attention, kids. Don't fool around with magic that you don't fully understand. The supernatural experiences intensified in the house. We would hear cupboards and drawers banging in the kitchen in the middle of the night. On one occasion, I heard my sister's bedroom door open and slam shut 6 times while I was in the shower. My sister wasn't home and my parents were asleep. There was no reason for anyone to be repeatedly opening and slamming the door. I would see shadow figures dancing and contorting outside my window. Everyone in the house was experiencing events beyond our comprehension. My mom said she could feel the presence of a girl in the house, that she liked to move things and play pranks. Enough was enough. My mother found a curandera, a traditional healer, to come and bless the home and perform a limpia in hopes that the spiritual activity would cease. My sister was home at this point, and she, along with my mother, walked around the property with the curandera. She prompted them to pray with her, sometimes in Spanish and sometimes in English. They moved from room to room, filling the house with the intoxicating scent of sage, expelling negative energy. When they got to my garage room, the curandera exclaimed, "I don't need to protect this room. Your son's protecting it and himself already." All of my spiritual paraphernalia must have had some protective properties. They then walked the perimeter of the house, praying as they went. When they got to the shed, the curandera stopped, closed her eyes, wincing as if in pain. They didn't enter the garage-like door, though it was open. The aura emanating from the shed was thick and malicious. A disembodied voice called to them from the darkness in a disturbing guttural language. A hateful speech so vile that it shouldn't be uttered this side of the earth's crust. My mom and my sister instinctively began crying. The curandera prayed silently, white candle flame flickering in hand, sage smoke recoiling away from the shed. At last, she ushered my mom and my sister away from the shed. "Jessica, I can't expel the entity from your shed. I don't know how it got there, but it's a demon and it's desperately trying to invade your home and rip your family apart. I can't get rid of it, but you can." The curandera left and never returned for a follow-up. The instructions she gave to my mom kept her occupied for weeks, and she never fully divulged what the instructions were. I'd been at work during these events. When I returned home and heard the story, my cynical skepticism got the better of me and I dismissed it completely. I'd never heard a disembodied voice. Also, why the shed? The other entities had no trouble infiltrating the house. Why was this entity, with all its alleged strength, having such difficulty entering? Bah humbug. One hypothesis my mom had was that it was attracted to the items housed in the shed. My paternal grandmother was the descendant of a bruja, a witch. Her grandmother was a bruja of mythic proportions. I don't know much about her life, and no one is left to tell her stories. But I know that when she died, a silver coin was found lodged in her throat. The payment for her soul that she sold to the devil for her powers. My paternal grandmother used this shed as long-term storage, and it's possible that the demonic entity was attracted to objects she possessed that were still imbued with my great-great-grandmother's power. Fast forward to a claustrophobically hot day described in my opening paragraph. My depression at this point was out of control. I needed to get out of the house and find solace in nature despite the heat. I had a mountain bike stored in the shed that was in decent working condition. What if I took it to the volcanoes and did a little biking to shed this funk? Seemed like a reasonable idea. I made my way to the shed and opened the garage-style door. Several dozen flies buzzed in the stale air within the shed. What a mess. A labyrinth of boxes stood between me and my bike, which was in the far corner of the shed. Slowly I navigated through, moving things as needed. It felt like a typical summer's day. The oppressive heat, the bugs, the dull, droning mechanical sound of a lawnmower in the distance. Wait. The droning sound wasn't coming from outside. I could hear it coming from within the shed somewhere. What was that? I was genuinely curious at this point, straining my ears to hear what this sound was and where it was coming from. It became increasingly louder. The droning mechanical noise metamorphosing into discernible individual words. It croaked in a gravelly tone. It took me a second to understand what was happening. The growling incantation seemed to awaken a primordial fear within me as my eyes started to fill with tears. I threw boxes aside and grabbed my bike and raced to my truck as fast as I could. I was shuddering and clearly uneased by what I had just experienced, but I was determined, maybe even more so now, to get away from the house and into nature. Once at the volcanoes, I rode around, taking in the vistas and feeling the sweat evaporate off my body. It was brutal out, but I was feeling alive for the first time in ages. As I rode along to one of the smaller volcanoes, I noticed a cave in its northern face. I'd never seen it before. Granted, I'd never been out here prior, but still, a cave, how cool. I lugged my bike up the slope to the cave's mouth and did what any 20-year-old adolescent would have done. I took selfies and had a snack. As I sat on a basalt boulder with my back to the cavernous void, I took in the view of the city. The Sandia Mountains in the distance. The sky was pale blue, as if it too was straining to colour the heavens in this oppressive heat. As I munched on my snack, I heard something familiar emanating from the darkness behind me. A low, droning murmur. I froze. The sweat on my brow now ice cold. No way, this couldn't be happening. It had followed me. Before it could get louder, I automatically leapt to my feet, grabbed my bike and raced as fast as I could pedal out of there and back to my truck. I don't remember having thoughts. I don't remember the heat or the fatigue of the ride. The only thing I could hear was the panting of my distempered breathing. Once I got home, I brought my bike into my room, lit candles and sage, and blessed myself and my bike, commanding that whatever had attached itself to my bike be gone. I never put my bike in the shed after that. I needed to tell my mom everything that happened and what I had resolved to do about it. We need to stop talking about it. We need to stop fearing it. The more we talk about it and feed into it, the stronger it gets. Do whatever it is you need to do to expel it from the shed, but don't talk about it anymore. She agreed, and eventually the spiritual activity slowed down, but it never fully stopped. The presence in the shed moved on. We still don't talk about it, just in case. So, did my mom accidentally open a portal when she helped the previous owner cross over? Was the demonic entity attached to my paternal grandmother's storage? Why was my mom the sole person that could rid the entity from the property? Why did it follow me to the cave? We don't know, but I hope never to experience anything like that in the future. Some things should remain in the shadows and left well alone. This story gave me absolute heebie-jeebies. Chills, goosebumps. It is a hot day here and I am sitting here going, oh, I didn't like that. I love how when you saw this large, bold Caucasian man standing in the corridor, you were just like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to continue eating my snacks. I'll just tell my ma when I see her. It's just easier. And I can remember reading about sort of banishing rituals or whatever that involve an egg. I need to look further into it. But I do definitely remember that being a thing. And I wonder, like, as you guys know, I hate using the word portal because I just think it's overused. But obviously, post-ritual, the bald man was gone, but things seemed to get worse. And I find it fascinating that this traditional healer was, you know, moving on, everything that was going on in the house, the little girl, whatever was causing the doors, opening and closing, moving things around, shadows. And then she got to the shed and was like, well, I'm actually not doing this. I like the fact that you and your room, Jessie, were protected, but it's terrifying that this disembodied voice came from the darkness. This hate-filled, guttural voice of darkness coming from the shed. But I see your point though. I'd be like, why is it in the shed though? Like, if it's so powerful, why is it in the shed? You know what I mean? I would be the same. But then for it to follow you, for you to experience it as like a low drone, and then, oh, hang on, that's not just a drone. That's a voice coming from the darkness that follows you to a cave. I wonder about whether or not it is to do with your great-grandmother. And I'm pretty sure I said last week, like, I'm not a witch. I don't practice witchcraft. I don't know anything about witchcraft. But we know that witchcraft exists because people practice it. I also, you know, I'm very aware that there's people who practice dark magic. Like, did your great-grandmother's stuff have something attached to it? And if your mom was the one that sort of opened the portal, as it were, is that why she had to be the one to close it? I mean, the idea of hearing that kind of otherworldly voice that triggers this primordial fear inside you is genuinely petrifying. And we say this all the time. When you don't acknowledge things, when you don't feed into it, it does seem to get exponentially better. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Rinks and Jessie for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story comes from the 25th of April 2025. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
AI is transforming customer service. It's real and it works. And with Finn, we've built the #1 AI agent for customer service. We're seeing lots of cases where it's solving up to 90% of real queries for real businesses. This includes the real-world complex stuff like issuing a refund or cancelling an order. And we also see it when Finn goes up against competitors. It's top of all the performance benchmarks, top of the G2 leaderboard, and if you're not happy, we'll refund you up to $1 million, which I think says it all. Check it out for yourself at Finn.ai.